let's make the switch to Laravel. Now, I want to have a lessons controller, and this is also going to be a resource. Let's just go ahead and register our resource lessons controller. So route resource looks like we want to receive the series and we want to receive lessons, right? So we receive the series lessons, then Laravel is automatically going to attach the wildcards right here, and we want it to map to lessons controller. Now look at this. In our view component, if we try to inspect, a view component actually has access only to the series ID, but we had already defined that if we type in series, Laravel is automatically going to use dependency injection and route model binding to pass in the series, but it's going to try to find that using the slug, right? But we have the ID. So what do? We can actually load the slug into this class, or while we are loading this, we pass it as a prop into the view component such that anytime we are making that request, we simply pass it. But why don't we do something more fun, right? So that we're going to review explicit route model binding. We've seen implicit where Laravel takes care of everything, but why don't we do explicit? So what I mean by explicit, we're going to define our own key or our own wildcard, and we're telling Laravel every time you see series by ID, bind something. Therefore, we're going to head over to our route service provider, and this is where we can actually define our own route model bindings. Okay, so what do we want? We want Laravel to bind series by ID to the series class. Okay, so let's import the series class. Okay, so bind this to this, and what we want to tell Laravel again is how to resolve it, right? Because if we tell Laravel this, it's simply going to use the default get route key name that we specified in this class, which is the slug. But then we have only the ID here. So we want to tell Laravel, when you see this wildcard, rather find using the ID rather than the slug. So what we can do is use the bind method, and we're going to be binding to series by ID wildcard, and we'll take in a closure right here. And this closure automatically receives the value of this wildcard in the route. And what we do right here is explicitly tell Laravel how to resolve this. Okay, so we're going to tell Laravel return series find by the value, because we know when we save series by ID, we are going to be passing in the ID. Okay, so what we can do is actually define a find or fail so that Laravel is automatically going to reject this using a model not found exception, and then we can catch that later or maybe handle it differently. Okay, so first we define a new wildcard that we want to use in our route file, and second we tell Laravel how to resolve this. If we don't tell Laravel this, then it's automatically going to use the get route key name to inject the series class. But then if we tell Laravel how to resolve it, it's going to call this callback rather than doing the default. Okay, let's try this out. In our web.php, what we can do is, before we actually start trying it out here, let's just define a get route, and the wildcard is going to be this, and we should actually wrap it there so Laravel knows it's a parameter, and then we can pass in a closure. But if we want Laravel to automatically inject the series class, we need to type hint it, right? So broadcast series, and we'll take in the instance right here. Then what we can do is just die dump the series. Okay, so we are type hinting a wildcard. Laravel is automatically going to search if we have a binding for this, and that's exactly what route resource does. It creates a binding for series, and in this case it's also going to create a binding for lessons, but we have automatically created our own for series by ID. So Laravel is going to check this out if we have a binding for that, check if there's a resolution, then it's going to use that resolution to get us the series. So let's go ahead and try this out in the browser. So if we try to visit the route and pass in 1, we see automatically Laravel just gives us the series class that matches with the ID of 1. If we try for 2, Laravel just does that behind the scenes, yeah? So you gotta love route model binding by Laravel. Okay, so now that we've done that, every time we want to actually use the lessons controller, we'll have to pass in the series. Then in our lessons controller, we can actually get the series that matches by this ID. So let's head over to our lessons controller. Okay, looks like we haven't created that. Let's go ahead and generate one. PHP artisan make controller, lessons controller, and we want this to be resource. Okay, that's generated. Okay, so now we have this store method, and this is where we actually want to receive the series, and then we want to store a new lesson. So we're gonna say series and get the instance in this variable. And then Laravel is automatically going to inject that if we have the series by ID wildcard. Now, what do we want to do in our store method? We just want to save a new series, right? And we actually might switch this out for a custom request But for now, I think let's go ahead and see how it works with this one. And then if there's a need for refactor, we might create a new request. Okay, so what do we want to do? Obviously, we're going to have some validation and we're going to use testing to drive this out. But for now, let's just go ahead and see how this is going to work. We can just create a lesson for the series. So series, lessons, relationship, and we call the create method. And we could actually pass in request all as a parameter. Okay, so we have the series and we have the lessons relationship defined in the series class. And then we simply access the create method and pass in the request all as a parameter. Okay, so it's automatically going to fill the series ID field. And then since we have this format of data, it's going to map into that. Okay, so let's go ahead and try this out. But for that, we need to take care of the create lesson.view post request. Therefore, what we want to do is add an event listener to save lesson. So click, it's going to call create lesson on this class, and create lesson is going to be a method. So methods, and we already have Axios imported. Therefore, we want to say Axios.post to an endpoint, and we need to make sure we pass the correct endpoint. Let's go to our web. We have series, lessons, and to create, we just need to visit this endpoint, right? So what can we do? We need the ID of the series. Why don't we pass that ID as a payload into this? So we're going to say series ID, and then we're going to say this.series ID equals series ID. Okay, and we can have a data right here that is series ID, and it defaults to an empty string. Now, what am I doing? This is our event listener. It's going to listen for events from the parent, and the parent has the possibility of passing in a payload, but we have the series ID available on the parent but not on the child, so we're going to pass it as a payload to this child. Let's head over to our parent. Therefore, it's lesson.view. Yeah, and while we are triggering that emit, we can actually trigger or send this dot series ID. Okay, now why am I doing this? I'm going to be passing in a series ID as a prop, and I'm going to be getting this from my index.blade.php, and then I can pass it into the create lesson.view component to use it to make post request. I could have actually gotten this from our lessons that we have right here, but imagine a situation where we have no lessons. That's going to break down really fast. So let's just add a new prep that is going to give us that. Therefore, in our index.blade.php, we need to pass in series ID, which is going to be series ID. Okay, so we have a prop, series ID, we receive it. Then when we are creating a new lesson and we are emitting that event, so our child component will know, oh, it's my turn to act, it's going to receive this as a parameter. Then in our create lesson, we can actually reference this when we want to define the URL for Axios. Therefore, we're going to use the backtick syntax so that we can reference this.series ID lessons, right? So if we check out our web.php, it's series ID /lessons, but we also need to prefix this with admin, right? So admin /series ID /lessons. Okay, so let's try that. So that then get the response, console.log response, the catch, still console.log the error that we get from the server. Oh my god, I just noticed we actually didn't pass this data to our post request. So let's just pass this in as a second parameter real fast. And rather than empty strings, we're gonna reference this.title and this.description, this.episode number, finally this.video ID. Okay, so now we're actually passing that data, right? Let's try this out in the browser and see what we get. Okay, it looks like we actually successfully created that. Now look at the data we're receiving from the server. It's the lesson object, the brand new lesson object that we just created. I'm just gonna hit pause right here and then we're gonna continue modifying this in the very next video.